have our speakers, which I'm very excited to announce today. We have Alex. He's a Stanford grad, and he's an amazing webinar speaker that we have here at SingleStore. He's a great expert, and we are very happy to have you, Alex. And then we have Madhukar. He's a technical evangelist here at SingleStore, and he's a great expert, been in tech since a lot of years, and has great expertise in the database sector. So I'm very happy to have you guys here, and it's a privilege for you guys to join us. And I think I'll hand over the mic to you guys now. Thank you.
Thanks, Yukti. So yeah, happy to have everyone join here today for this super exciting topic we have on hand, building full stack AI apps. You'd see undersold Madhukar a little bit. He's actually our CMO, but I think technical evangelist maybe fits him a little better. So before we jump into all of that, building full stack AI application, obviously, when we're building full stack, we're talking about the entire stack and we have to really start at the foundations to understand and motivate like why we want to build with the technologies that we're going to be building with today. And that's really going to start with this concept that we're really seeing start to emerge and solidify called RAG. RAG might be familiar to many of you, but for those that aren't, RAG is essentially the process by which we infuse a generative AI chatbot's context window or chat window, if you're using ChatGPT, with information that it can use to provide, relevant, helpful, and accurate responses. Because, for any of us that have used ChatGPT or GPT-4 or CRUD or Gemini for longer than 5 minutes, you'll very quickly find out that it does this thing called hallucinating, which in normal human terms, we just call lying or making things up. And we don't want our chatbots to lie or make things up, especially if we're working with, private proprietary company data. And we also don't want to have to go into our table or our spreadsheet or our CSVs and manually copy and paste items into a chatbot's context window every time we'd like it to understand that context. And so this pattern called retrieval augmented generation has emerged to really automate that whole process of how do you find the right pieces of information? How do you supply that information to the chatbot? And how do you make sure that that whole pipeline is performant, that it's able to be evaluated, that it's secure, and so on. All qualities that we'd like to see in our enterprise applications that we've come to expect from our enterprise applications. Moving on from RAG, RAG is really going to power this, AI stack architecture that we've seen come about as generative AI applications have gotten more and more popular. And that's really going to start at the top with your UI. And we're going to be covering many of these components today. Your UI, which is going to be, your UI components, your conversational UI, really the ways by which the end user interacts with your chatbot. One layer down, we're going to have the API connectors, right? And those are probably going to be where most of us developers live. That's the kind of the LLMs themselves through which you interface, or the LLMs which you interface via APIs, tools which you interface with via APIs, search APIs, like calendar APIs, email APIs. If you're a developer in this space, you've probably become very familiar with all the different connectors that come together to make an end product, right? And that's where you're going to be spending the bulk of your time. And finally, at the kind of bottommost layer, where we at SingleStore believe is the foundation of any generative AI architecture, is your contextual data store or your database. And that's going to contain all of your contextual information that you would like to be able to supply to your AI application, to your chatbot. That's going to be, you know, your Slack messages, potentially your PDFs, you know, private company documents, images, audio, you know, customer support tickets, markdown files. You know, we have actually a number of different webinars on how to deal with these different data types. But the bottom line is your company, your side project, your enterprise has a lot of different data modalities and just data that you would like for your LLM to understand. That needs to sit inside of a database that's going to actually be Gen AI native and going to be able to support all of the different functions that modern Gen AI applications require, like, you know, fast approximate nearest neighbor search, you know, vector indexing, not just vector capabilities, but also your traditional relational database capabilities, because, you know, the world runs on relational databases, and you know, we would not be here without relational databases. Relational databases are going to be able to be queried with, you know, both traditional SQL languages or traditional, you know, lexical search, able to be queried via SQL, and also able to be searched over semantically via vector search. So that's kind of the AI stack architecture that we're going to be talking about today, that we're going to be diving a little deeper and making a little more concrete, hopefully, for all of you that have joined us today. Zooming in a little bit more into that contextual data layer, and I'll skim over a little bit of this just for the sake of time, so that, you know, we're all able to see Madakar's super cool demo. You know, inside our contextual data layer, like I mentioned before, obviously, you know, we have the traditional relational tables that we're all familiar with that run every modern enterprise, but also, you know, this new vector data type. Not really that new, actually, because, you know, at SingleStore, we've supported vectors since 2017, but this data type that has really come into vogue because of generative AI called vectors. And vectors are really going to be the way that a Gen AI application is able to search over its corpus of data, not just via, you know, traditional keyword matching or exact text matching, but actually by matching the meanings of the query and snippets of data in the actual database. And this is a pretty new search pattern that we've seen, you know, become popularized because of RAG, right? We get a query from the user, we get a message from the user that asks about, you know, something, you know, it's a developer that's asking about Pythons, and we'd like to return it context not about Pythons that live in the Amazon rainforest, but Python, the programming language, right? That's where semantic search really comes in handy. Now let's get a little more concrete and talk about some of the technologies that we're going to be building with today. And the first that I want to talk about is Vercel. And now Vercel, for all of you here that aren't familiar, is a front-end SDK that really makes it seamless for you to deploy web applications, right? You know, Vercel's gotten a lot of traction recently because what it does is it essentially makes it super easy to deploy web applications that scale seamlessly, that are able to be collaborated on with your team super easily. And there's a bunch of built-in analytics and monitoring and optimization that makes your website run super fast. And it's you know, it's a technology that a lot of us developers have begun to adopt increasingly, because it abstracts away a lot of this, a lot of the traditional kind of hiccups and obstacles that, you know, you run into when you try to deploy a web application publicly. Now, Vercel runs on NextJS, which is a framework in JavaScript for fast server-side rendering and static site generation. NextJS is what we're going to be building on top of today. And you know, we chose to use NextJS in this demo, really because it's a superset of modern JavaScript features. It has JavaScript in its name, but also has this kind of rich ecosystem of plugins and APIs for extending functionality, particularly geared towards modern front-end web development, or powering modern web applications on the back end. And so that's just a little bit about Next.js. And finally, this is maybe a term that you're not as familiar with, or an SDK that you're not as familiar with, but a tool that we at SingleStore have been developing for a while now, and it's called Elegance SDK. Elegance SDK is a collection of tools that we've developed, an SDK that we've developed for real-time AI full stack JavaScript applications to build on top of SingleStore database. So Elegance includes support for MySQL and SingleStore Kai, which is the way that SingleStore is able to interface with applications built on top of MongoDB, and it provides a bunch of the abstractions for vector search, chat completions, file embedding generations that traditionally you'd have to go into raw SQL code to actually write yourself, but it basically bundles in a bunch of these commonly used Gen AI functionalities like vector search, and includes a bunch of best practices built in, so you don't have to worry about that. And as a developer, you can just jump right in and start building. So before we move into the demo, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're using SingleStore in the first place, and following that, we'll go right into the demo. And really, we're a little biased here at SingleStore. We think that SingleStore is the best database to transact, analyze, and contextualize data in real time, and that also makes it the best database for Gen AI applications. We can deploy on-prem, in the cloud, and in hybrid environments, and we support all of these traditional relational database capabilities, storing memory in row-based forms, in columnar forms, and also able to store vector data. And supporting all of these modalities really allows us to, outperform with all of these, real customer metrics that you can just kind of take a look at here. And under the hood, how all of this comes together is that SingleStore really just simplifies the traditional sharded kind of database architecture of having fast in-memory storage along with slower hard disk or SSD storage. It really what it does under the hood is it aggregates all of these data storage formats under one database that's automatically managed by our proprietary technologies, so that you can get the best of both worlds. You can get super fast read-write performance, and also bottomless storage for in a single database, and in a way that saves you money and saves you time. So I'm going to skip over a little bit of this. I wanted to touch really quickly also on our web-based Jupyter Notebook support, which is a new capability that we've launched within the last few months. SingleStore, this new web-based Jupyter Notebook feature is called it's hosted in a really cool collection of notebooks that we have at SingleStore called SingleStore Spaces. And SingleStore Spaces is essentially the way that you can get up and running on a lot of these webinar use cases, as well as common kind of data analytics use cases, and run these end-to-end demos directly or right next to your databases. So if you go into SingleStore and sign up for a trial account, start a free shared tier database, you can go ahead and get started on some of these notebooks to kind of explore some of these data analytics use cases, and try out the fastest way to get code running right next to your data, and minimize latency and kind of improve performance. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand off to Madhukar here. I've been rambling on here for about 20 minutes now, so hopefully you have enough time to cover the demo, Madhukar. Go ahead.
Thank you, Alex. So let me just share my screen. And then, oh, it says, oh, so you need to stop sharing, Alex. All right, so what we wanted to do today was just go through the application itself. So let me just first walk you through what we are going to do. And then I'll walk you through how to install it, what exactly is the architecture as well as the code and what you can do with it. And then, of course, we also will point you to the documentation where you can see how to turn this into your own application. So first and foremost, if you go to this site, which is Sign Next, Sign as in SingleStore and Elegance SDK. So SINENEXT.org. And Yukti can paste this in the chat so that you can go there. And it's very simple in the sense it's a full stack app, and it gives you minimal code to get started, but it has the scaffolding to show you two things. One is a CRUD level example, which is create, read, update, and delete inside of SingleStore. So this helps you build out a full stack app. And then a RAG-based chatbot. Now, if you click on the Git repo, you will go to this location, which will walk you through the steps of installing it. And I'll go through this in this live demo as well. But if you go here, it's important to note that when I go to the CRUD and I do add user, because it's a publicly available database, we didn't want everybody to go and start creating the data as well as start deleting all the data, because we have had incidents in the past where people would just spam us. But when you do this locally, which I'll show you, you are able to do edit. You're also able to do delete, and you're able to do add user as well. And when you click on the chat, it is a simple RAG-based chatbot, which has 5 books, or actually, 5 books. And then depending on which book you choose, what is this book about? These books have been converted into embeddings, and those embeddings are inside of SingleStore. So this chatbot is an example where it uses OpenAI to do RAG-based queries only against these books, right? And if you want to use your own data source, this again is a good starter for you to just go ahead and get started. And then basically, you can customize it on your own. So it's a very simple, but a very powerful stack, which consists of 3 things. So just as Alex was mentioning, why is this an important piece? So let me just take a step back. There've been, in the last few years, 2 important full stack apps. Of course, there's a lot more that has happened, but there are 2 important ones that became really popular. The first one is the LAMP stack, and the LAMP stack was Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. But over a period of time, there's a bunch of things that MySQL cannot do. PHP is still used by WordPress and a lot of other marketing low-code apps, but it could not do analytics. It could not do AI because it was add-on. And of course, over a period of time, there were new technologies that came in. The second one that came about, which was over a few years ago, was MERN stack. And MERN stack is Mongo Express, which is part of, related to Node, R, which is React, and N is Node. Now, in the last few years, again, Mongo is great for document-based database, but it doesn't do relational, it doesn't do analytics, it has added vectors, but there are still, it's not a real-time database. And if you're really trying to build a React-based full stack app, NextJS as the front end and the back end is really powerful. And of course, Elegance SDK and SingleStore, I'm going to get into a little bit to show you what it is. But first things first, what I will do is to just go to my local host and show you that CRUD example. So here, as you can see, these are enabled for me. And I will also show you how to do this. If you just do a copy of the .env sample file, you should be able to just put your credentials and you're good to go. But if I were to just delete this row goes away. If I were to, let's say, add user here, demo, and this is not needed, okay. And you should see that it sorts it by the creation date, which is one of the fields inside of the database and the table, and it shows up over here. And again, if I want to delete it or edit it, it's very straightforward, simple, but gives you the full example. So now I want to explain the overall stack itself, because there might be people who are not, familiar with either NextJS or Elegance SDK or SingleStore itself. So think about NextJS as a full stack because it has a React framework, and the React framework consists of both a front end and middleware or a backend, which is your APIs and your server components that you can create. And then, of course, it talks to it, it's almost like an ORM, Elegance SDK, but also includes AI features, which then talks to SingleStore. And SingleStore, somebody was asking, can it do vector database? Yes, Alex just covered that. It can do vectors, it can do JSON, it can do geospatial. So practically all the data types except for graph. Now, it doesn't mean that you cannot use it for graph use cases. You still can, but it's a slightly different topic. So let's not muddy the water. So at a very high level, if you look at the Next.js architecture, let's assume this is a simplistic version of the front end. It's really a page, which is file system-based router. So if I go create a folder called users, which I'll show, and within that page.tsx or JSX, then the URL becomes /user, right? And within that, you have both a combination of React, which is JavaScript, and HTML. Again, we'll take a look at that. And if you create a bunch of similar pages across different routes, you can use the same layout, which is through a Next.js layout. So these are just fundamentals of Next.js. If you need to get into more details, we can point you to some really good tutorials from Vercel as well that they keep doing on YouTube too. Next, what you do is there is a specific named folder within Next.js that you can create, and you can call it API, /API. And within /API, if you create these folders, then you can go create something called route.tsx. And within that, you can create your own API endpoints. And so these endpoints in this use case, what I've done is, or what we have done, is we have created this API endpoint called users. And then we have created route.tsx, which has just 4 API methods: get, post, put, delete. Get is, of course, to read. Post is to create a new record. Post is to edit. Put is to new record, and delete is to remove a row. So very simplistic. If you just copy this and then change your methods to call those database queries, you should be good. But here, instead of me writing out the SQL, which, by the way, I could still do because, at certain times I might have to build an application that requires SQL, then I can still do that. But mostly it is like an ORM because I can just call Elegance SDK client and .transformers, which is one of the objects. And that has a bunch of methods which allows you to do both vector searches and CRUD level operations, which is handled by this, right? And I'll walk you through that as well. But in the database itself, in this example, what we have done is it's very simplistic, and I'll show it to you in the sense there are 5 tables for the 5 books, and each book has a chunk of the text. There is some sort of a summary, I think we did, and the embedding. The embedding is, of course, just vectors. And then users is a very simple example where you just see the set of users as rows, and there's a bunch of different columns. So let's look at this first. So once I have done this, and if I go to localhost, and let me just, and Alex or Yukti, if it's small, let me know. I can make it slightly bigger. If I just go to localhost /API/users, which is a get, you can see it gives me from the database the entire JSON object. Is this visible, Yukti or Alex?
Yes.
Okay. So that's the API call, right? So this is what we are looking at right now. Next, what I wanted to do is take a look at the tables. So here I am personally a big fan of JetBrains as well as WebStorm, but you can do all the things that I'm showing today in the free version of Visual Studio or Code. So here, the thing I like about is I have connected my database here, and these are my tables, right? So each table, this is a book. So let's say if I were to double click on it, it shows me the data. And it's very simple. It is the text, and the embedding is a very long set of numbers because these are vectors. And if you're interested, my other tool that I love is called Table Plus. And Table Plus is much better in other things, also a paid tool, by the way. We are not associated with either JetBrains or this, or even NextJS for that matter, but I'm just giving you options of what you can do. So if I look at the users table, it has ID, first name, last name, username, email, image URL, and created a date because when we do CRUD, I want to show the user created the most recently as at the top. And the others, as you can see, these are, as I just went through, these are the embeddings. And then there is a books table, which basically has summaries and some details, the metadata about the book with the ratings, the reviews. So in the next version of this library or the application that we have built, I'll also show you how to pull out analytics, the real-time analytics, along with the AI vector search or hybrid search, and do that in an extremely sub-millisecond kind of latency. All right, so we have the table here, but how do you go and create that? So what I would do is, if you go to singlestore.com, actually, let me just show that. First thing you want to do is try free or sign in. I've already signed in. Then I would come to this place. This shows me the workspace, which has my compute and the database. So one thing that is neat about SingleStore is that I can have multiple databases associated to a workspace. Workspace is just a virtual machine. And within that, when I'm doing compute or running any queries, I can keep it up and running. And if it is, let's say, I'm doing bad jobs for whatever reason, not that you should with SingleStore, then I could even bring it down. I can terminate it and create a new workspace with maybe a bigger space or a bigger RAM, but the database is isolated. And the database, I can create as many as I want, and I can associate it to this workspace or multiple workspaces. So in my example, I've created this thing called Books Chat MySQL. And you saw the tables that's associated with it. But let's say if you do want to see it over here, again, here's the overall tables. And then if I choose one table like users, and look at sample data, you can do it over here. And if you want to run SQL, you can do all that from here as well. But what I wanted to show here is for this app to work, once you've done this, you've signed up, you've created a database, and you've created tables and other schema within that, you want to go to connect your app, and this will give you your overall host name that you need to connect to, the port name that it's running on, and here let's just say Node.js. And you will need admin user and password and the database name as well. So the admin user and password you will get here. You can reset to whatever you have. So now you have database host, you have the port number, you have the user, you have the password, and then you basically have the name of the database that you're going to connect to. Now that's all you need to now go into your code base and then basically do everything from there. All right. So if I go back to this and look at the Git repo, we can follow through from here on how to install it. So first things first, I can copy this. I can go to my command line and then just say, not this yet. So git clone and the name of the Git repo. And I'm doing this live, by the way. So just like any other live demo, there's always an error. So if it does, I'll fall back and explain how to solve that as well. So now I have obviously this folder, which is synnex.starter. And let me just go here. And if I look at all this, now my entire code base is here. So first thing I'm going to do is npm. Oh, the other thing I need to also tell you, as a prereq for this, you have to have Node installed. So I use this thing called NVM, which is Node Version Manager. And you can, if you're on a Mac, you can just install it with NVM, and then it should show you when you do NVM list. So this is the NVM. So this way I could say NVM use, and then LTS, which is the latest. So it tells me that, okay, now I'm good at version node 20.13.1, bunch of libraries have been updated and so on. So then I am going to do, if you just follow this, is I am going to say npm install. And so it's going to read all the package.json files. If you've ever done this, I don't need to explain this. It has now done the installation of this application. Next step is I would just, use Visual Studio Code or whatever you use to then just open it. And then you can start working through the code, which I'll explain, but I don't want to do since my app is already running locally on port 3000, I don't want to start another one. So if you have gotten this far, you have your app running and doing fine. Next, what I would do is in this repo, there should be a file called at the root level. Actually, let me just first explain this structure here. So the first thing after you've done the install is you need to populate this, right? So this one you can leave empty, or if you're using, in SingleStore, there are two kinds of databases that you can create. One is Sky, which is just an exact replica of Mongo. So you can just run Mongo SH against it, or you can use the MySQL. The MySQL one, we call it MySQL because SingleStore is MySQL wire protocol compatible. That means anything that works on MySQL should work on SingleStore. Having said that, I will say though that there are certain things that's unique to SingleStore, so you have to keep that in mind. For example, there is no foreign key relationship. There's also columnar storage and a row storage. Row storage is memory. Okay, very different topics, but if you just want to keep the defaults, that works beautifully as well. So here you could do MySQL if that's the default that you chose, or you could do CRUD. Whatever it is, you will see it in your connections in the SingleStore portal that I just talked about. DB user, password, DB name, DB host, and this is optional, Open AI API key. In the sense, if you want to use OpenAI for your chatbot, go ahead and use here. But there are other methods within Elegance SDK that allows you to use your own large language model API endpoint, right? And I'll walk you through that as well. All right, so just to recap, we looked at the app, we could do CRUD, and we can do RAG-based chatbot, which is connected to my database right over here. And within this database, I have books, and those books have already been converted to embeddings. Now, if the question is, hey, how can I get the sample database I'm using? And how do I pre-populate it with embeddings? I will share that script as well. It should be in the repository sometime today. It's fairly easy, or you can just use your own. And then what we did was we looked at the bigger picture of NextJS, which has everything in it, and then we installed the app. So far, so good. Everything looks fine, right? And if you've done everything properly, then on your local host, you should be able to see this page. And when you go here, you can see localhost users. And if you go to localhost 3000 chat, you should be able to just get it to work. All right. Now let me explain the overall code base here so you can just go in and start building on your own. And actually, it is all listed here in the README doc with some example of how to do it. We are still working on adding a full documentation to it, but this will get you started, right? So first and foremost, we looked at the APIs that we had created, right? So the way that happens inside of NextJS is within the app folder, and I'm using NextJS 14, by the way. If you use something which is a previous version, it's slightly different, but I highly encourage you to use either 13 or 14. They even released, I think, preview version of NextJS 15, but at least use the NextJS 14 because it has routers and a bunch of other new features. So if I look here within this structure, if you remember, I said NextJS is file-based routing. So I don't have to go create like in Express a different set of router files. All I do is I create an API folder, and I have users as well as Elegance. And I'll explain Elegance in a second. But users is just simple route.ts. And here it's very simple. There is a get, there is a post, there's a put, and then there's a delete. But let's look at the get one. And if you look at the get, we are defining some constants here. And at the end of the day, we are just calling a method to then get the list of users from this method called getUsers. And if I click on getUsers, which is now defined inside of library users, which is right here, library users, and these are all my database, basically related files. You can start with these, or you can just go create your own. But you would see there is a file for each one of the CRUD operations. So this one's read, and again, very simple. It defines an async. So when you use async, you have to do promise and wait. And it's just very simple call to elegance server SDK.controllers.find many. And then here we say, okay, I want the collections of users. And then I also do order by created at descending, because remember I said I want to see the created the most recently at the top. We do first name ascending order, and we do offset by 10. So I'm saying just do limit by the first 100, because we don't want to do select star and get 1 million of these. An offset tells you just skip the first 10 or first 100 for whatever reason. So it's just an example. But more importantly, if you look here, it is using this now before you start to call these methods for controllers, you are using this Elegance server client, which we had installed from Elegance SDK, and that is located in my library Elegance folder. So let me just go there. If I go to lib Elegance, and this one has really very two simple files. There is the server client here. This is the package that we installed as part of the installation of this app. So when you do npm install, it installs the Elegant SDK as well. But if you want to do it later on, you could say npm install @SingleStore and then /elegance-sdk. So here I'm importing this package. And then we are saying, hey, just go create this object. And in order to create this object, I want to use the MySQL one. I could have used the environment variable that I created, but here, it was a little bit sloppy here. So here, then I just pass in the host, user, DB password, and DB name. Again, process.env is just another way to read your environment variable, because when you deploy it in production, you don't want this to be hard-coded. And then if you want to initiate the OpenAI as your LLM, you can do this over here. All right. So now we created the SingleStore clients by importing the SingleStore Elegance SDK. We created all these create, update, delete files. Then we went to the API users route. And then for each one of these APIs, now I'm calling those methods. And then when I get it back, I return it as a next response. So whoever calls this now gets this object of users. And then in the front end, I'm just going to go in and parse through it and show it. So what does the front end look like? Again, very simple. The front end is also a set of pages that I can create, or I could just do inner as over here. And then within here, I just create for every folders, there is, a page.tsx. So the layout is being used across all of this, but I can override it by putting a layout tsx here as well. So what this means is when I create the folder users and then create a page.tsx, it eventually resolves to /users. So what you see here is page.tsx inside the folder users. And again, if I want to create other pages, I just go create that folder, and within that create the page.tsx. Now, without getting into too much of the weeds, because most of it is it's NextJS, all you do is you return, of course, you use, a bunch of other, I'm using for styling, Tailwind, and so on. You can also do metadata for that page here for SEO, or you can put it all inside of layout. It's totally up to you. But at the end of the day, what I'm doing is I am just taking this user create component, dropping it here. And then I'm also passing it the user count, which is just a constant over here. And the table itself is a component called users table. So similar to pages, again, file-based routing, I get to components. And within components, if I go into user, I should be able to see table tsx. And the reason it is called table is because the export function is called users table. So this is the name of the component. So I can now use, the bracket /users table. So here, again, what I'm doing is I'm calling the API endpoint that we had created, getting back the response. And we are actually also creating a schema using Zord, but don't worry about it. If you don't know, you can just take the raw stuff and show it here. And then basically taking a few other out-of-the-box components from Tailwind, like CRUD and so on. And then within that, we are just putting in the columns as well as the, the properties of the thing that we are getting back. So again, a very simple map function. Similarly, so this is the CRUD level part, right? Again, you can just copy it, start using it, copy paste it, or you can start from scratch by removing all of this, create a new page, keep the APIs, modify that, and use your own CRUDs in the APIs in the library folder. Similarly, we have the chatbot component, which is all inside one container. And there's a handle function or a handle submit function. And what it basically does, it calls the other component that talks to OpenAI and talks to Elegance SDK to get the output from the database, the embeddings, and then sends it to OpenAI. And then it basically outputs it in the form. So if you are using GitHub Copilot, you can just go in and say, hey, just explain this code to me, and it should be very straightforward. So nothing out of the ordinary over there. All right. So we looked at CRUD, we looked at the AI piece, we looked at the database again. Very straightforward here once you create the database. And like I said, I will share the scripts if you're interested to seed this example books chat MySQL, or if you're interested, it's also on a different repo that you can just go and look at. So what I wanted to do next was if you just search for So if you go to SingleStore Labs/Elegance SDK, you can look at the examples of the other methods that you can call using this. Of course, you can do the whole thing that we just did with CRUD, but there's like insert one. There is something called insert many. So if you want to do a bulk insert, then there is update many. If you want to do a bulk update, you delete many. So you get the idea, find one, find many. But what is really cool is here, create embedding. So you can use this to say, hey, here's my text, also use OpenAI or some other model and create the embedding and then put it inside my database too. And you can create file embeddings, create and insert file embeddings. But the one that is really cool, and we are working on doing a newer version of this, is you can also run just .product search. So instead of trying to figure out, what is your index and all that, and what is the SQL for it, just call it. And these are the parameters that you send. It'll give you a semantic search and bring it back. There are a few other things that we are going to add, but here's one that is also important. When you say create chat completion, if you're using OpenAI, you can also pass it a different model. So you could say, here's a different model. And I see Alex is on, that means I'm running out of time. So I'll stop here now. Okay, the last thing I would say is, if you're interested in grabbing that script directly from a public repo, in the Elegance SDK, click on Books Chat. That's a separate repo. You go to scripts, and then within scripts, you have this database setup TS, and it uses a bunch of other files too, which is a bunch of JSON, and it has embeddings. Run it, and it should be able to populate your simplistic database schema as well. All right, so now I am going to stop sharing and see, Alex, what questions do we have?
Yeah. So I know we do only have 5 minutes here, so we might only be able to reach a few of the questions, though our goal is to answer every question, either live or over email. So do please keep those questions coming in. if you have them. One question, Monica, that I saw you were still typing out the answer to that might be good to answer live is there support for other data layers beyond MongoDB?
Yeah, so when we say data layers, there's a bunch of different things there. So first of all, data types, we support all data types except for graph, which is RDF. But like I said, you can do, graph use cases even beside that. For other database, we can do CDC in. So you could bring in data from MySQL, from Mongo, and a bunch of data lakes that we are going to announce very recently as well, or pretty soon. And once the data is in here, then you can run normal SQL or other method calls.
Great, yeah. And I wanted to tackle another question here. Actually kind of group two questions into one. First is, what about image plus text data instead of text only data? And then another question from Randy who asks, is it possible to connect Elegance SDK with Mistral or Grok or open source LLMs? So really good questions here. As far as I'm aware, Elegance only supports OpenAI chat models, if I'm not mistaken.
No. You can actually support all other models. So look at one of the methods, which basically is any API endpoint or any completion endpoints. And as long as it matches the open API schema, that should work.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I was gonna point everyone towards LangChain, which so given that Elegance supports opening API schemas, LangChain is a really great way to work with image and text data and open source LLMs like Mistral models, models out of Hugging Face or Grok. We've actually done a bunch of really great webinars on all of those topics. So Mistral models, open source models generally, Grok, as well as image and text data and audio data as well. So would highly recommend checking out those webinars, and they should connect just as seamlessly into Elegance as they do with LangChain. All right.
Yeah, so to answer the other question, Alex, which is, what was it? What was the other question? That images, right? So the example that I have, you can store images in two different ways. One, you can just store it as a blob inside of SingleStore as a binary object, although that's not recommended if you have millions of those. So the example that I have is just a text-based column, and it stores the URL to that image. And that image, it could be on an S3 bucket, it could be on a Google bucket. But yeah, you can definitely store any kind of binary data, including videos, into the database. And once you convert an embedding, you're just doing a search across that as well.
Great. I think we are just coming up on time now, actually. So Yukti, is there anything that we need to do to wrap up the giveaway winner, maybe?
All right, sounds good. We do have one question on it wasn't like it says that they're asking for a link that Madhukar was using at the end. Says it was on SingleStore GitHub or maybe the org account.
Yeah, so it is if you go to sign next, I'll put it in the chat so you can give it to others. That should link you to the repo directly from there. And I'll move it to our SingleStore Labs repo.
All right, sounds good. So thank you so much for joining, guys. And thanks, Alex and Madhukar, for this amazing session. So quick notes before we announce today's raffle winner. Alex, if you can just share the screen real fast, and like if we can go to the screen which has the upcoming webinars, so I can just announce and people can scan and RSVP. So we've got amazing sessions coming up over the next few days. On May 31st, which is tomorrow, we have how to build personalized marketing chatbots. That's Gemini versus Laura. And It's available on your screen. It will be available on your screen real soon. And thank you, Alex. So, and on June 3, we have using open source Copilot for personalized banking applications. And on June 4, we have choosing best fit embeddings for your AI app, OpenAI, Mistral, Llama, etc. And on June 26, we have unfreeze your iceberg data, which is something which I talked about a bit ago, and it's also there on your screen. So if any of this thing is interesting to you, please RSVP right now, and we all hope to see you all there.